Chapter 1. Why You Wouldn't Last a Day as a Mongol Herd Boy. Part 1. Smoke, ice, and a herding stick. The first breath of morning stings your lungs. You're 12 years old, and it's the cold that wakes you, more than the smoke curling up from the dying hearth, more than the tug of your mother's voice. Inside your family's yurt, heat is a memory. Your sheepskin blanket smells like goat hair and old milk, stiff with last night's frost. Your bones ache from sleeping on packed earth, and your stomach growls. But there's no time to sit by the fire. Outside, the wind has teeth. The herd must be found before it wanders too far, and already the sky is turning pale with dawn. You blink against the dimness. The felt walls of the yurt sweat with moisture, the ceiling hole letting in slivers of gray. Your older brother is lacing up his boots in silence, jaw clenched. He doesn't talk much anymore, not since the wolves took 3 of your sheep last spring. You scramble into your deal, a long coat of patched wool, fasten the leather belt tight around your waist, and pull on your boots. They're stiff and crusted with mud from the last storm. There's no right or left boot, just the same battered pair you've had since you were 9, handed down from your cousin who died in a snow squall. Breakfast is a hardened lump of curd and a few sips of sour mare's milk. You chew it slowly, eyes half-lidded, as your father steps out into the wind to scan the plains. The yurt flap opens with a thud. A blast of icy air invades the space. Up, he growls, though he doesn't need to say it. Everyone's already moving. You reach for your herding stick, a crooked, smooth piece of birch carved by your grandfather. It's not much, but it's yours. You duck outside. The steppe yawns in all directions, flat, endless, and unforgiving. The grass is brittle, crunched beneath your boots. A herd of shaggy goats cluster on a nearby ridge, steam rising from their backs. Somewhere far beyond the horizon, wolves are watching. You mount your horse with the ease of someone born to it. There is no saddle. No reins, even. Just a loop of rope around the animal's neck and the rhythm of your thighs. The horse jerks under you, restless, but familiar. You whisper to it, the way your mother taught you, and the beast stills. Your father barks orders. You and your brother split off in opposite directions, driving the herd inward with shrill cries and sweeping arms. Your stick clacks against goat flanks, herding them through frost and wind. Time loses shape on the steppe. Hours blur. You chase stragglers, mend a broken leg with sinew, wipe blood off your tunic from a sheep that got too close to a horned bull. There's no help. No teacher. Just your instincts, and the unrelenting need to keep every animal alive. By noon, you haven't eaten. The wind has turned, colder now, and clouds gather on the edges of the sky like a warning. You know what that means, another storm. You click your tongue and drive the herd faster. But something's wrong. A shadow moves on the horizon. Low. Silent. Watching. You freeze. Your heart kicks in your chest. You squint. Wolves. Your breath fogs. You raise your stick. The goats bleat nervously, sensing what you see. Your horse stamps and snorts. One wrong move now, and you'll lose half the herd, or your life. You yell. Loud, sharp, and desperate. The sound splits the sky. Your brother hears it, a distant speck galloping toward you. You ride into the wind. Into danger. You scream again, wave your stick, and charge. The wolves scatter. You'll count the losses later. For now, the herd runs. You run with them. And somewhere behind you, the steppe yawns open again, wild and indifferent. Part 2, the cold is your teacher. The wind never stops. It doesn't howl like a storm, it whispers, endlessly, like an old woman muttering to herself. It slithers beneath your deal and bites at your skin, even when you're layered in wool, fur, and stubbornness. On some days it brings snow. On others, dust. But always, it brings cold. Cold is the first thing you learn to respect out here. The second is silence. The third is that no one is coming to save you. After the wolves retreat, after you've helped guide the panicked herd back toward camp, you and your brother don't speak. There's no need. You both saw them. You both know what could have happened. Silence is not absence, it's understanding. By now the sky has dulled to the steel-gray color that promises more snow before the night is out. The goats clump together near the eastern rise. Your younger cousin, Naren, is trying to mend a broken fence made of warped willow branches. He waves you over. You help him lash it tight with sinew twine, your hands numb, your breath fogging like an old horse's snort. The fence won't hold for long, but nothing does on the steppe. Everything is temporary: yurts, fences, skin, life. You patch, bind, hope, and repeat. You return to the yurt and duck inside. Smoke stings your eyes immediately. Your mother has just added dung to the fire, and it burns with a thick, sour sting. The interior is dim, smoky, and warm in the way stale bread is warm. Familiar. The air tastes like sweat, wool, old milk, and ash. You don't notice. You've lived in it your whole life. Your sister, only 6, is crouched near the fire turning a bowl of tarik, curdled yogurt, into cheese. She presses it into discs with calloused hands far too small for such hard work. But in your family, everyone contributes. She will grow up with cracked palms and steady eyes. Like your mother. Like you. Dinner is a stew of boiled mutton, hard curds, and onions that taste of frost. Your father returns from the far hills just as your mother ladles the stew into thick ceramic bowls. His beard is rimed with ice. He has brought no game, but he has news of another family, 2 valleys over, whose yurt caught fire. Their goats scattered. No one died, but they will sleep cold for weeks. You eat in silence. The stew is greasy and hot, and you gulp it down in measured sips, trying not to scald your throat. Every bite counts. You cannot afford waste. The marrow in the bones is scooped clean. The scraps are saved for the dogs. After dinner, you and your brother go outside again. The sun is nearly gone now, a red smear behind distant hills. You help him string a new leather lead for one of the colts. You practice tightening knots with frozen fingers. The cold teaches you patience, because if you rush, the knot will fail and your horse will run. And if your horse runs, you're not getting it back. That night, the yurt is crowded. Your uncle and his 2 boys are visiting, and they've brought trade goods: salt, dyed felt, and dried plums. You've never seen real plums before. Your cousin slips you one when the adults aren't looking. It's sweet and sour and chewy. You savor it so slowly that it almost disappears before it's gone. Your grandfather speaks by the fire. He tells of a winter, long ago, when the snow was so high it buried the herd for days. He lost a toe to frostbite. He shows the stub like a medal. You listen, even though you've heard this story before. Out here, stories aren't just entertainment. They're instruction manuals. Each one is a lesson in what not to do, or what to do faster. Before bed, you help your mother scrape sinew from an old goat carcass. You pull long, glistening threads from the meat and stretch them taut on a drying frame. This sinew will mend clothing, bind tools, even stitch wounds. It is more valuable than silver. Your hands are raw by the end of it. When the fire dims, your family curls together like sleeping dogs. You lie beside your brother under a patched woolen blanket. Your feet touch his. The body heat is shared. The cold pushes at the felt walls, seeps through every seam. But you do not fear it. You respect it. You understand now why no one lives here unless they were born here. The steppe does not bend. It does not care. It simply is. And if you do not learn from it, quickly, completely, it will erase you. That is the final lesson the cold teaches: endure, or disappear. Part 3, Hunger knows your name. Your stomach has a voice. You've learned to ignore it most days, a constant groan beneath the breath of wind. But on days like this, when the snow blinds and the goats scatter, it speaks louder. Today, it is a scream in your belly. And there's nothing to hush it but work. Dawn hasn't broken yet, but your mother is already at the fire, blowing on coals, stacking dung cakes like precious bricks. You stir from sleep beneath the heavy hide, blinking against the sting of smoke and the ache of your limbs. Your hands throb with chill. Your mouth is dry with the taste of night. There is no breakfast waiting. No bowl of milk. No crust of bread. Just a gulp of water so cold it burns going down, and the hard news your father mutters, one of the newborn goats is missing. Again. You throw on your deal, stiff with last night's frost, and step outside. The world is white. The storm has passed, but not gently. Snow lies in thick, crusted banks. Tracks are faint. The wind howls in short gasps, tugging at the hems of your clothing like an impatient ghost. You don't stop to admire the sky. There is no poetry in cold when your herd is shrinking. You mount your horse. The animal is half-starved, ribs showing under its winter coat. Still, it responds to your legs and your voice. It knows the stakes. You ride out over the plain, eyes scanning every fold of land, every dark shape in the snow. You find the first goat huddled near a rock, shaking, its breath coming in short bursts. You lift it into your lap, it's heavier than you expected, and its fur is wet with melted frost. You do not name it. You never name them. That's a lesson beaten into every child of the steppe. Don't name what you might eat, or bury. Back at camp, the others are patching the roof of the yurt. A hole tore open in the night, and snow drifted in like a thief. Your brother is hammering pegs into a new felt sheet while your cousin boils water for the animals. You drop the goat beside the fire and begin churning a saddle blanket. It reeks. You churn anyway. Hunger sits with you like a second body. Around midday, your uncle returns from a hunt, dragging a hare by its feet. It's not much. One animal for 9 people. But it's something. You watch as your mother skins it, her hands precise, her knife worn smooth from years of use. The organs are removed carefully, nothing wasted. The meat is chopped, boiled, stretched. That night, you get a piece of thigh the size of your thumb and half a spoonful of broth. You don't complain. Complaining is a waste of heat. Your grandfather tells another story, this one about a winter when they had to eat a horse. It had broken its leg in the ice. They cried after the first bite, but they survived. You ask what it tasted like. He says, like shame and salvation. Later, you sit outside under a bone-bright moon, whittling a stick into a whistle. It doesn't work, but that's not the point. The point is to keep your hands moving, your mind away from the ache in your belly. You hum a tune your mother used to sing when you were younger. You can't remember all the words. But the melody keeps the wolves away. Tonight, you sleep light. You dream of bread. Of apricots. Of fires that never go out. But when you wake, there is only the wind. And the work. And the hunger that never forgets your name. Part 4, Bareback and Bone-weary. Before you can speak your mother's name, you learn to ride. There are no lessons. No saddles. No reins. No soft-voiced encouragements. You ride because you must, because a Mongol who cannot ride is like a fish that cannot swim. Useless. Pitiful. Dead. Your first ride was on a shaggy mare barely taller than you were. Your uncle tossed you onto her back with a grunt and let go. She bolted across the plain and you screamed until your voice disappeared in the wind. You didn't fall, barely, but even if you had, no one would have rushed to pick you up. Falling is part of it. Pain is part of it. Learning is survival. Now, years later, the horse beneath you is your closest companion. Not a pet. Not a friend. Something more honest. You do not name it, just like the goats. But you know the way its ears twitch when it senses a fox. You know the rhythm of its breath. You know it will outlive some men you've met. This morning, you rise stiff and sore. There's a boil on your heel from walking too long in damp boots. But the herd has begun to shift southward, sensing something in the air. Your father orders you and your brother to guide the animals across the shallow river bend while there's still light. The sky is cruelly clear, sunlight doesn't mean warmth. It means glare. You squint as you ride bareback, feeling every bone and muscle ripple beneath the mare's hide. The herd moves slowly, bells clinking around goat necks, their bleats rising in waves. Your legs ache from clenching, your spine from balancing. Then, you see it, a commotion near the ridge. A young yak has fallen behind, limping. It's bleeding from a gash across its flank, likely from ice or sharp rock. You whistle sharply and ride toward it, herding the goats inward. The yak tries to run, but stumbles. You leap down, pull the beast upright, and use your sash to bind its leg tight. The blood steams in the cold. It looks at you with dumb, terrified eyes. You mutter a wordless sound of comfort. Not for the yak, but for yourself. By the time you reach the river, your limbs are shaking. The ice hasn't fully formed yet, and the water bites like knives. Still, the herd pushes through, and you with it, thigh-deep in snowmelt, teeth chattering. Your horse moves forward with the same determination as you. Together, you make it across. Your brother is already on the far bank, hauling a goat by the horns. He nods at you once, and you nod back. Nothing more is needed. The job is done. You return to camp soaked and half-frozen. Your mother peels your clothes off like bark from a dead tree, clucking her tongue but saying nothing. She rubs your hands with fat and presses a hot stone wrapped in wool to your chest. You don't shiver, not now. Not in front of your sister, who is watching with wide eyes. That night, you rub horsehair oil into your saddle blanket, checking for tears. You clean the hooves of your mare. You prepare her food before your own. A Mongol without a horse is not a Mongol. Your grandfather says, "We were born in the saddle and will die in it. The steppe is our cradle, our grave." You believe him. You sleep beside the yurt entrance that night, curled in a dry blanket, one hand on your riding crop. Outside, the mare huffs gently in the dark. She sleeps too. And in your dreams, you are riding, not running, not escaping, but flying across the steppe, wind in your face, hooves beating like war drums. You don't dream of food tonight. You dream of freedom, shaped like a horse's shadow on the snow. Part 5, Fire, Hide, and Bone. The yurt breathes. It expands with heat and contracts with cold, a living thing made of felt and wood and smoke. It groans in the night wind and sings when the fire is strong. You know every creak, every flicker of shadow along its inner walls. This is not just a house, it is a womb, a shield, a shrine to survival. And you are one of its keepers. Today is not a herding day. Today is a making day. Outside, the sky has swallowed the sun. A storm is building in the west, a thick bruise of cloud. The animals are penned close, tethered and wary. You've been told to stay near the camp and help with repairs, but there's more to do than just lash rope. Your mother hands you a bundle of rawhide strips, wet, pungent, coiled like sleeping snakes. You will stretch them today, cure them in smoke, and shape them for straps, whips, and bowstrings. You anchor one end to a stake and pull with all your strength, your fingers numb and slick. It takes hours. Your back aches. Your arms shake. Still you pull. Meanwhile, your sister scrapes a goat hide with the sharpened edge of a bone. She hums as she works, her breath rising in clouds. Nearby, your cousin is boiling water for glue, stirring it with a carved stick. The air smells of meat and ashen iron. Your grandfather is crafting arrowheads. Flint chips fly with each precise strike, small as snowflakes, sharp as the wind. He doesn't speak, but he lets you watch. Watching is how you learn. Later, he beckons you over and presses a sliver of bone into your hand. "Spine of a crane," he says. "Stronger than it looks. Like you." You smile, but say nothing. At midday, the fire crackles and you sit in a half-circle with the others, roasting marrow bones on the edge of the coals. The fat drips into the embers with a hiss. You suck the marrow out with a practiced slurp, it coats your throat, rich and oily. It will keep you warm longer than stew ever could. Then, the real work begins. Your father unrolls a torn saddlebag and tells you to mend it. You sit cross-legged on the packed earth, thread sinew through a curved bone needle, and begin stitching. Each hole must be tight. Each line straight. If it fails on the steppe, someone could die. Maybe you. The wind howls louder. Snow begins to fall, light and slow like drifting ash. You can't see far beyond the yurt, but you don't need to. Everything you need is here. You finish the saddlebag and help your brother wrap fresh bindings around a spear shaft. He tells you about a time he hunted a fox through 3 valleys. You ask if he caught it. He shakes his head. The steppe is always faster. As evening falls, your mother lights a new fire. The smoke climbs upward, curling through the roof hole like a prayer. Shadows dance on the yurt walls. You sit and carve symbols into a slat of bone, a horse, a goat, a crescent moon. Your sister giggles when she sees them. Are they spells? She asks. No, you say. Just reminders. Outside, the wind becomes a roar. The yurt trembles. Your grandfather places his hand on the wooden center pole and mutters an old phrase you don't recognize. A blessing. Or a warning. You sleep close to the fire that night. The storm claws at the world outside, but in here, you are warm, wrapped in wool and hide, your belly full of marrow, your dreams heavy and dreamless. The yurt holds. Because you made it. Because you mended it. Because the fire is yours now. And so, you sleep, not as a child, but as a keeper of flame, builder of shelter, mender of hide and bone. Tomorrow, the wind will wake you. But tonight, the yurt breathes around you. And you breathe with it. Part 6, Lessons Without Words. There is no school on the steppe. There are no scrolls, no slates, no bells that ring to mark the start of learning. But every day is a lesson. Every mistake is a punishment. Every success is survival. You are taught not by books but by blood, wind, and watching. This morning, your brother wakes you with a kick. Get up, he mutters. We ride with father. That is all he says. No explanation, no comfort. You don't ask. Asking makes you soft. Instead, you rise, shake off sleep, and grab your riding stick. The sky is still dark, touched with the first gray of dawn. You hear horses snorting in the cold. You feel your ribs under your fingers, still lean, still hungry. Your father waits by the tethered horses, his coat pulled tight, his eyes unreadable. He hands you a bow, not your usual practice one, but the real kind, thick and curved, strung with sinew. It's a man's weapon. You do not smile. You do not thank him. You simply take it. Because this, too, is a lesson. You ride west. The steppe rolls out beneath you, white and gold and bitter. The wind is sharp today, sharp enough to steal your breath if you let it. But you do not. You press your knees into the horse's ribs and follow. After an hour, your father halts. He dismounts slowly, silently, and crouches behind a low hill. You and your brother follow suit. There, he says, pointing. A group of wild marmots is clustered near a patch of dry grass, unaware. Shoot. Your brother notches his arrow and looses it in one smooth movement. The shaft whistles. One marmot falls. Your turn. Your fingers tremble on the string. The bow is heavier than what you're used to. Your breath clouds in front of your eyes. You aim, exhale, release. The arrow misses by a handspan. Your father says nothing. He only looks at you. You retrieve the arrow. This time, you aim lower. You watch the wind. You forget the cold. You release. A second marmot jerks, flips, stills. Your father grunts. That's as close to praise as you'll get. You skin the marmots there in the snow. The flesh is lean but edible. The pelts will be dried, used for lining boots. Your father shows you how to twist the gut into cord. You listen. You do not speak. When you return to camp, your mother barely looks up. She sees the meat. She nods. That's enough. Later, your grandfather beckons you to sit beside him. He hands you a length of horsehair and shows you how to braid it into a rope strong enough to hold a galloping colt. His hands move like wind over grass, quick, silent, practiced. You copy. You fail. You try again. He says nothing. He doesn't need to. You burn your fingers pulling a pot from the fire. No one soothes you. You spill water. Your brother cuffs you behind the head. You fix it. You learn. There is no shame here. Only correction. That night, you lie beneath a sky thick with stars. No roof above you, just the breath of the universe. Your mare lies nearby, her breath steaming in the cold. You smell smoke, horse, sweat, milk. You feel older than your years. Not because you are wise. Because the land insists. And out here, the land is the only teacher that never grows tired. Part 7, The Day the Storm Stayed. The storm arrives before the sun. You feel it first, not in the sky, but in the silence. The animals are too still. No bleats. No hooves. No breath on the wind. It's as if the steppe is holding something inside. Your mother throws open the yurt flap. Snow rushes in like a thief, stinging your face before your eyes can adjust. The horizon is gone, swallowed in a pale wall of swirling gray. The wind keens. It sounds like morning. Get the ropes, your father commands. Everyone moves. No time for hesitation. You grab the leather lines coiled by the entrance and rush outside with your brother. The goats are already huddling, their eyes wide, their bodies pressed into one another. The snow is falling sideways. It bites and blinds. The wind roars in your ears, making every command sound distant. You run from group to group, lashing the herd together, binding the stronger ones to the weaker, tying them to pegs hammered deep into frozen ground. Your brother shouts something. You see his mouth move, but not the meaning. You nod anyway. The horses are restless, nostrils flared, eyes rolling white. You tie your mare's lead to the central post. She stomps but doesn't bolt. You whisper her name, not a name you say aloud, not even to your family. But she knows it. The yurt strains in the wind, creaking like an old tree. Snow piles against the walls. Inside, your mother and sister press dung bricks tighter around the fire, trying to shield the coals. Your grandfather stands by the door, leaning into the wind as if daring it to take him. Hours pass. Time loses shape in a storm. It becomes cold in motion and effort. You hold the rope until your fingers bleed. You wipe snow from goat faces. You dig air holes and drifts. You punch the ice forming on your own eyelashes. You do not stop. No one does. You've heard the stories. Of children who wandered in storms and were found in spring, stiff as fence posts. Of whole herds buried alive. Of yurts lifted and flung like leaves. This storm does not pass by midday. It stays. By dusk, the snow has swallowed the world. The yurt glows faintly from within, a warm blur in a howling void. You stagger inside, soaked, frozen to the marrow. Your mother strips off your clothes and wraps you in dry felt. She rubs your limbs furiously, curses you under her breath, kisses your forehead in the same motion. You drink a broth made from boiled hoof and marrow. It tastes of smoke and blood and salt. It saves your life. That night, the storm bangs on the yurt like an angry god. You lie between your brother and sister, all three of you wrapped in hides like grains of rice and dumpling dough. You hear your father muttering prayers under his breath. Not to a god. To the steppe. Because that's what the storm is. The steppe, reminding you who owns you. By morning, the world has changed. The yurt stands. The animals live. But the snow has buried everything up to your thighs. You help dig. You help find what the wind tried to steal. You have aged in a single night. And when the sun finally rises, pale and cold, you do not greet it like a blessing. You greet it like an elder. With respect. Because now you know, on the steppe, survival is not guaranteed. It is earned. Part 8, Milk, Blood, and Ferment. The storm has passed, but the land still shivers. The snow crunches beneath your boots like dried bones. The goats move sluggishly. Your fingers are cracked and sore from digging paths all morning, your shoulders tight with ache. But today is no rest day. The herd needs to be milked. The maras are restless. Life must continue. Your mother hands you a wooden pail and points at the tethered animals. You nod and begin. Mare's milk is warm, frothy, and alive with scent. You kneel beside the mare, whispering to her, pressing your head to her side so she knows your presence. The muscles under her skin twitch. You begin to milk. The stream hits the wood with a splash. Steam rises. The pail fills slowly. You carry it back toward the yurt, careful not to spill a drop. Your mother is already setting up the fermentation barrel, a tall, narrow container that smells of 1,000 past brews. You help her strain the milk, then pour it in, stirring it with a long paddle. The air is cold, but the scent of the ferment is sour, sweet, almost intoxicating. This is arag. The drink of warriors. Of weddings. Of summer nights and bitter winters. Of your ancestors. Later, your father slaughters a sheep. You watch without flinching. You've seen it before. The blow is quick, the blood collected in a bowl. Your mother catches the first spurts, those are for mixing with salt and organs. The rest drains into the snow. You help skin the animal. The hide is peeled back with a long, practiced draw of the knife. Steam rises off the carcass in the freezing air. The dogs circle, panting, but know not to come too close. Your brother handles the gutting. He's older. Quicker. You separate the fat from the lean meat, stacking it carefully. Nothing is wasted. Even the lungs will be boiled. Even the stomach lining will find use. You drink blood soup by the fire, the bowl warm in your hands. It tastes of iron and salt and life. Your body warms from the inside. Your sister asks for seconds. That evening, the arag begins to bubble in the barrel. Fermentation has started. You take the paddle and churn it slowly, rhythmically, as your mother hums. Your arms are tired, but you do not stop. This, too, is your duty. The drink will be ready in days, but you always steal a taste. Sharp. Fizzy. Alive. Your grandfather laughs when he sees your sour face. The first cup always kicks. The second makes you sing. The third teaches you who you are. You believe him. After dark, your father gives you a full cup. Not as a treat, but as a test. You drink it slowly, feel it tingle in your belly, loosen your chest. You laugh for the first time in days. Then you help stir the fire, feed the dogs, clean the knives. Because the work never ends. But in moments like these, when your belly is full, the wind is silent, and the barrel breathes like an animal, you remember. You are not just surviving. You are continuing something old. Milk, blood, and ferment. These are the foundations of your world. And you are learning to carry them all. Part 9, The Broken Colt. You hear the scream before the sun rises. It cuts through the thin morning air, a sharp, panicked whinny. Then another. You're already half-dressed, fumbling for your boots when your brother bursts through the yurt flap. It's the young one. The colt. The words slam into your chest. You don't wait for more. Outside, frost glitters across the plain. Hoofprints lead toward the rise where the herds gather at dawn. You run, your breath streaming behind you, following the sounds of panic. Your father is already there, crouched beside the trembling animal. The colt is on its side, one leg bent at a wrong angle, its eyes wide and wild. It must have slipped on the frozen slope during the night. Your mare stands nearby, stamping nervously. She knows. The herd knows. Injury is weakness. And weakness, out here, is a scent predators can smell for miles. Your father examines the leg, muttering. Fractured. Maybe worse. Your brother looks away. You kneel in the snow and place a hand on the colt's neck. It shivers beneath your touch. You remember when it was born, its first trembling steps, its whinny no louder than a bird's call. You had helped clean it, feed it, teach it to trust you. Now it won't meet your eyes. The discussion begins, low and grim. Your father says it's too young to survive the winter like this. Your grandfather says even a healed leg would leave it lame. No use to the herd. A burden. You know what they mean. What they're preparing to do. And still, you speak. Not loudly, not defiantly, just enough. Let me try. Your father's eyes flick to you. He doesn't answer. You don't wait. You strip off your gloves and begin gathering what you need: dried grass, rope, splints of wood from the repair pile. You tear a strip from your own deal to use as padding. Your hands are shaking. Your brother joins you. Says nothing. Just hands you the tools. The splint is crude. The bindings are tight. The colt kicks once, then sags into the snow. You cover it with a hide and whisper the old words, half prayer, half lullaby. The ones your mother used to sing to sick animals. All day, you sit beside it. You bring it water. You rub its legs. You keep the others away. That night, your father does not stop you. You sleep beside the colt, your arms around its neck, feeling its slow, uncertain breaths. In the morning, it is still alive. You check the binding. No worse. Maybe better. Your grandfather says nothing, but he nods. That evening, you feed the colt mash by hand. It nuzzles your palm. Its eyes are calmer. You know the truth. It still may not live. The cold may take it. The wolves may come. But for now, it is not broken. And neither are you. The steppe allows no softness. But it does not forbid mercy. Not if it is earned. You understand now, to survive is not just to harden. It is also to care, to guard what might still grow. Even here. Especially here. The wind howls. The night deepens. And you sit, boy and colt, beneath a sky full of watching stars. Part 10, a day that is yours. The sun rises gold across a white plain. There is no storm today. No wolves. No colts crying in the night. Only wind, soft and slow, and the crunch of hooves moving steady through frost. Today is ordinary. And for that, you are grateful. You wake before the others, warmed by the slow breath of the fire and the shape of your brother curled beside you. You slip from the yurt and stand still in the early light. Your hands are rough. Your boots cracked. Your eyes older than your years. But you are alive. You breathe deep. The air tastes of ash, milk, and sky. The kind of air that makes you forget, just for a moment, how hard the land has been. Your mare greets you with a low sound. You press your head to her neck. Her warmth seeps into your chest. You feed her quietly, brushing the ice from her mane. Then you walk the ridge, checking the herd. The goats are calm. The snow is thin. You find yourself humming. Later, your sister chases you around the yurt with a stick. She's trying to steal a roasted curd from your hand. You let her win. She giggles so hard she falls over, and your mother scolds both of you. But she's smiling. Your grandfather sharpens a blade and tells you to watch. You've watched 100 times before. Today, he lets you hold the whetstone. He grunts approval. At midday, your father asks you to take the herd to the eastern rise alone. Alone. You do not show your excitement. But when you mount your mare and feel her shift beneath you, when you call to the goats and they follow without fear, you feel it. This is your day. The steppe stretches in every direction. There is no sound but the wind and hooves and breath. You ride ahead, watch the herd like a hawk, guide them with clicks of your tongue. You fix a torn strap with sinew from your pouch. You rescue a kid caught in a drift. You drink water from a frozen stream, crack the ice with your staff. There is no one to see you. No one to praise you. But you know. You return at dusk, the sun painting the plain in fire. Your father says nothing, but he nods once. Your mother gives you the biggest piece of meat. Your brother thumps your shoulder. And later, as stars spill across the sky, your grandfather places something in your hand. A small carving of a horse. Bone, smooth with age. A token. You're ready, he says. That's all. You fall asleep with it in your palm. Outside, the steppe breathes. The goats murmur. The yurt holds. The fire hums. You are no longer just a boy. You are herder, healer, hunter, builder. The land is still hard. The wind still bites. The hunger still waits. But now, you do not fear it. Because you have lived a day that was yours. And that is how it begins. Not with glory. But with grit. With a colt's breath on your neck. With blood on your hands. With fire that doesn't go out. That is why you would not last a day out here. And why you did. Chapter 2, The Rise and Rage of Genghis Khan. Part 1, A Boy Called Temüjin. Before he was a Khan, before the earth trembled beneath his name, he was just a boy. Temüjin. Born clutching a blood clot in his fist, an omen, the elders said. A sign of greatness. Or violence. Or both. His world was not the empire you imagine. Not yet. It was a world of blades and betrayal, of clans and shifting loyalties, of hunger and wind. The steppes were ruled not by laws, but by who could ride faster, strike harder, and endure longer. Temüjin's father, Yusugii, was a chief of the Boringhistory, a small tribe, proud but vulnerable. He named his son after a Tatar enemy he had killed in battle, as if to stitch victory into the boy's skin. Temüjin's childhood was short. By the age of 9, he was already betrothed. A political bargain. His father brought him to the family of his future bride, Borte, to live among them. It was the way of the steppes, alliances before affection. But on the ride home, Yusugii was poisoned by enemies. Temüjin never saw him again. Orphanhood came swiftly. With his father dead, the Boringhistory abandoned the boy and his family. Power respected strength, and a widow with sons was weakness. Temüjin, his mother Holon, and his siblings were cast out. Exiled to the wild. Stripped of everything. They lived by scraping roots from the frozen ground. By trapping rats. By boiling bones. Hunger became their god. But Holon did not break. And neither did her son. Temüjin learned to track game, to skin hides, to tan leather with ashes and spit. He watched the way snow drifted in dunes, the way horses moved in herds, the way men lied with their eyes. He became a boy with a blade and no one to trust. He had a half-brother, Bektar, older and arrogant. Food was scarce, tempers hot. One day, Bektar stole from the family stash. Temüjin did not argue. He killed him. Shot him with an arrow. There were no tears. Only silence. His mother wept, but said nothing. On the steppe, survival rewrites morality. Temüjin's soul began to harden. He did not become cruel. But he learned to be cold. Precise. Unforgiving. Sometimes he wandered far from the camp, watching other tribes from ridges, memorizing their movements. He saw how they fought, how they dressed, how they betrayed each other. The steppe was a chessboard of ambition and fear. By his early teens, Temüjin already had a vision, a vague one, but burning bright. Not just to survive. But to gather. To bind. To rise. And somewhere beneath the moonpale sky, the boy with the blood clot name began to imagine what it would take to tame a world that devoured its weak. Not strength alone. Loyalty. Order. And fire. He was not yet Genghis Khan. But the steppe already knew his name. Part 2, Captive Among Wolves. Temüjin was 13 when he was taken. It happened in the spring, when the rivers thawed and the grass turned green with hunger. He had wandered from camp to inspect a ridge where marmots nested. He never returned. The Temüjin, former allies of his father, were the ones who caught him. Men his father had once feasted with now bound him like a calf for slaughter. No warning. No mercy. He was a boy, yes, but the son of Yasugi, and that made him dangerous. They tied him to a wooden beam, a cane, thick, splintered wood that clamped his neck and wrists. It was heavy. Meant for humiliation. It bent his back, pressed his chin to his chest. He couldn't feed himself. Could barely walk. The Temüjin paraded him through their camp. This is what happens to ambition, they said. At night, they laughed around their fires while he lay in mud. Children threw stones. Dogs snapped at his feet. One boy urinated on his shadow. But Temüjin watched. He watched the guards. Their habits. Their arguments. Who dozed off first? Who drank too much kumis? He memorized patrol routes. Faces. Weaknesses. And he waited. One night, during a feast, the guards grew careless. A boy named Sorganshira, no older than Temüjin, came close to bring him water. Temüjin looked him in the eyes. Not with desperation, but with something else. Fire. Loosen it, he whispered. The boy hesitated. Then, without a word, he slid the pin from the beam. Temüjin dropped it in the mud and ran. He sprinted into the blackness, barefoot and bleeding, the cane still around his neck. He ran until his chest tore with cold air, until he could no longer hear the yells behind him. He found a stream and dropped into it, floating downstream like driftwood. He scraped his hands raw trying to dislodge the cane on the bank. It didn't budge. He howled, not in fear, but in fury. Eventually, he found shelter in the tent of a family loyal to the boringhistory. They hid him. Fed him. Smashed the cane with a hammer. He didn't thank them with tears. He thanked them with silence and survival. When he returned to his own people, he said little. But his back was straighter. His eyes harder. He had tasted captivity. And it had not broken him. It had refined him. After that, things began to shift. Slowly, at first. A few old warriors from his father's days pledged their loyalty again, not to a boy, but to a survivor. He repaid their faith by hunting, gathering, protecting the camp. Not with speeches, but with presence. He stood in the cold when others shook. Rode the long routes alone. Taught his younger brothers to shoot by candlelight. He met Borte again, his betrothed, and found her no longer a stranger, but a match. When he married her, he took her not into wealth, but into resolve. She saw in him what others now feared, a fire lit by humiliation, fueled by purpose. He began to send messengers, quiet ones, to other outcasts, lost sons, cast-off warriors. He spoke not of conquest, but of something older, unity. No tribe. No clan. Just loyalty. The Temüjin laughed when they heard he was gathering men. What was Temüjin but a child with a grudge? But even wolves forget, the boy they tried to break had learned to hunt. He would never wear a collar again. And one day, it would be their next that bowed. Part 3, Blood Oaths and Iron Shadows. The steppe remembers promises. Not the kind whispered by firelight, but the kind spoken with blades and bound with blood. Temüjin knew this. And by his 16th year, he had begun forging his future not with horses or arrows, but with alliances. There was no throne. No kingdom. No palace. Only fire circles, wind, and men who followed because they believed, or because they feared what he might become. He began with a name, Jamuka. Once, they had ridden together as boys, shooting arrows at birds and racing across the valleys on bareback ponies. They had shared food, laughter, even a blood bond. Brothers not by birth, but by blade. Now, Jamuka led one rising power, and Temüjin another. Both were boringhistory by blood, but the wind was beginning to pull them in different directions. Temüjin gathered the poor, the orphaned, the dishonored. He promised them reward for merit, not birth. His was a tribe of the overlooked. Jamuka held to the noble lineages, the ancient ways. His was a tribe of tradition. Their rift was quiet at first, like a seam splitting in silk. But the steppe is always listening. And soon, the clans began to choose. Temüjin's rise wasn't just from battles, it was from bonds. He knew that men did not bleed for orders, they bled for loyalty. And he made his camp a place where that loyalty could root. He named men to ranks, not by birth, but by bravery. He remembered who stood with him through winters. He gave meat to the hungry, horses to the faithful. He honored his wife Borte as his equal, consulted her in council. Whispers spread. And then came the turning. One night, as the fires crackled and the sky spun with stars, a rider arrived with word that Borte had been taken. Raiders from the Merkit tribe had attacked. They had stolen her. Temüjin did not speak. He saddled his horse. He rode for 3 days straight, gathering what warriors he could. It was not an army, but it was enough. He sought help from his blood brother Jamuka, and Jamuka, bound by their old oath, answered. Together, they stormed the Merkit camp. They rode at dawn, hooves thundering across the frost-bitten plain. The raid was swift. Brutal. Borte was recovered. But something in Temüjin had changed. Borte had been gone months. And when she returned, she was pregnant. Temüjin said nothing. He named the child Joki, guest. And loved him all the same. But the cracks between him and Jamuka had widened. The blood oath still held, but now it was stretched thin over ambition and suspicion. Temüjin's men spoke in whispers. Jamuka's camp was larger, richer. But Temüjin's was faster. Hungrier. They trained day and night. They moved like water, camped in silence, hunted with discipline. He divided them into units of 10, 100, 1,000, a system that would echo across empires. The old ways mocked him. Said he was playing soldier. But the young men followed. And the steppe began to shift. Temüjin wasn't a Khan. Not yet. But already he was more than a chieftain. He had drawn a circle in the dust. Around it stood men of no great name, only great loyalty. Inside it, he stood with them. Equal, yet lifted. When they feasted, he served them with his own hands. When they bled, he bound their wounds. He did not speak of destiny. He only reminded them, we are nothing alone. And the day would come when the blood oath broke. When old friendships would turn to smoke. But not yet. For now, the boy who had crawled through mud in a kang, the boy who had starved beside rats and wolves, was gathering something far stronger than steel. Trust. And trust, once earned on the steppe, could turn even the wind to your will. Part 4, When Brothers Become Enemies. The winds of the steppe shift quickly. One day, you ride beside your blood brother. The next, you face him across a battlefield. Temüjin and Jamuka had once shared salt and fire. But fire spreads. And salt can lose its savor. Their visions no longer walk side by side. Temüjin's rise unnerved the old guard. His loyalty-based structure threatened those who ruled by blood and birthright. In the spring of 1187, the split was no longer whisper. It was war. The two former friends called their banners. Jamuka brought the weight of noble clans, glittering with silk and arrogance. Temüjin summoned the poor, the sharp-eyed, the hungry. His ranks were filled with men who had nothing to lose but everything to prove. He did not speak of conquest. He spoke of unity. Of fairness. Of brothers who ate from the same pot and rose by the same fire. Jamuka laughed. Called him a shepherd boy playing Khan. But the shepherd had wolves at his side. At the Onan River, they met. Temüjin's army was smaller, but faster. He deployed scouts like wind-blown seeds, split his troops into squads of 10, 100, 1,000, each with a clear leader. Communication was silent and swift, signals passed through flags, horns, and the beat of hooves. Jamoka relied on size, bulk, ceremony. Temüjin relied on speed, surprise, fire. The first clash was brutal. Arrows sang. Horses screamed. The ground shook. Temüjin nearly took the day. But Jamoka had more men. And the battle turned. Temüjin retreated, his forces scattered but alive. Jamoka captured dozens of his followers. What he did next would echo forever. He did not ransom them. He did not release them. He boiled them alive. 80 young warriors, cooked in iron cauldrons as a message to all who followed Temüjin. This is the cost of rebellion. The steppe recoiled. Even among the hardened tribes, the act was too much. Cruelty is remembered. But so is courage. Temüjin vanished into the wilderness. But he was not defeated. He licked his wounds, buried his dead, and listened. He found new allies among those sickened by Jamoka's act. Tribes who once feared him now sent quiet messengers. And slowly, the flock grew teeth again. Temüjin did not seek revenge immediately. He rebuilt. He reorganized. He reinvented what it meant to follow a leader on the steppe. He outlawed kidnapping of women between clans. He punished theft harshly. He honored the word of even the lowest man. He believed that unity could not be demanded, it had to be earned and protected. And so, he waited. Years passed. Jamoka grew softer in his power. Temüjin sharpened his. By the time they met again, the roles had reversed. Temüjin now had the numbers, the tactics, and the hearts of men. He struck like a thunderclap. This time, Jamoka was the one who fled. He would flee again and again, a prince haunted by the boy he once called brother. But the damage had already been done. The blood oath had shattered. And from its pieces, Temüjin was building something the steppe had never seen. An order not of clans, but of cause. Not of birth, but of bond. He was still not Khan. But the day was coming when all would bow, not to lineage, but to law. And the steppe, wild and free, would find itself beneath a single standard. Forged not in silk, but in blood, fire, and the ashes of brotherhood. Part 5, The Wolf Banner Rises. The year was 1206. On the banks of the Onan River, beneath a sky full of wheeling hawks and sweeping wind, the tribes gathered. Not as enemies. Not as fractured clans clinging to old grudges. But as one. The Kuriltai, Great Council, had been called. Not for war. Not for revenge. But for something rarer on the steppe, unity. And at its center stood Temüjin. His hair was streaked with dust and sun. His eyes were lined with years. Not old, but weathered. Forged. Men who had once called him a bastard now called him Khan. Not out of fear. But because they had seen what he could survive. What he could build. One by one, the banners were raised. The Jalair. The Amjarat. The Mankut. The Urud. Even some of the Tehud, who had once bound him in chains. Now, they bowed their heads. And as the sun crowned the ridge, Temüjin was given a new name. Genghis Khan. It did not mean emperor. Not yet. It meant universal ruler. And the wolves of the steppe howled in answer. The unification of the Mongol tribes was more than ceremony. It was revolution. Genghis did not merely claim power, he rewrote it. The old feuds of lineage and inheritance were swept aside. In their place, a code. The Yasa. It punished theft, protected envoys, outlawed betrayal, and demanded loyalty above all else. It treated warriors and herders by the same law. It was not justice by nobility, but justice by necessity. Harsh. Simple. Absolute. Every man, regardless of origin, was sorted into the decimal system. 10-man squads. 100-man companies. 1,000-man battalions. No tribal divisions. No favoritism. Only function. He declared that no one, not even his own blood, was above the order. And they believed him. Because they had seen him walk the same roads, eat the same bitter roots, bleed under the same sky. Underscore 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 underscore. Then came the black standard. The solda, a pole topped with a wolf's tail, snapping in the wind. A symbol older than kings. A reminder that Genghis ruled not through temples or thrones, but by the will of the eternal blue sky and the strength of those who followed. Borte stood at his side, no longer just a wife, but a queen in all but name. His sons, Joki, Shagatai, Ogidi, and Talyui, watched from behind, already learning how to wear command-like armor. He gave gifts to the poor. Horses to the faithful. Rank to the deserving. He promised them nothing but struggle, and they loved him for it. Because the steppe had long taught them to expect suffering. But no one had ever promised them purpose. Not like this. The first orders were not for conquest. They were for stability. Herding routes were formalized. Water rights were clarified. Disputes between clans were settled by his council, not by blood feuds. Messengers rode out, swift, fearless, bearing the words of the new law to the far corners of the land. The Mongols, once scattered like dry grass, were now bound together by vision. Then came the maps. Genghis began asking questions few on the steppe had ever asked. What lies beyond the sands? What cities live behind those mountains? Who are these people who look down on us from their towers? He wasn't content to rule the tribes. He wanted to test them. To see if the fury of the horsemen could ride farther than any had dared. To see if the wind of the steppe could sweep the world. But that was still to come. For now, the black standard rose above the plains. And beneath it, the tribes knelt. Not in chains. But by choice. Because the boy who had once been left to starve by his own people had become the man all others would follow into the fire. The wolf banner rose. And the world, though it did not know it yet, began to shake. Part 6, The First Thunderclap. The deserts of the west called to Genghis Khan like a challenge hurled across the horizon. Beyond the steppe lay cities of stone, empires with walls and wealth, markets heavy with silk and spices. The Khwarezmian Empire, arrogant, rich, and sprawling, sat like a jeweled spider across the trade routes of Central Asia. And so Genghis sent a message. Not with swords. But with trust. He dispatched a caravan, 100 men, merchants bearing gifts, trade goods, tokens of friendship. An olive branch wrapped in wool and salt. But Khwarezm was ruled by Shah Ala ad-Din Muhammad. A man of vanity and suspicion. He saw not diplomacy, but deception. He seized the caravan. Executed its men. Confiscated its goods. Genghis waited. Perhaps it was a misunderstanding. He sent 3 more envoys, bearded and humble, offering peace. The Shah had one of them beheaded. Genghis did not raise his voice. He gathered his generals. He stood before the black solda. And he said, "The people of the West have chosen war." It was not rage that filled him. It was purpose. Cold. Measured. Relentless. In 1219, he unleashed the full force of the Mongol army on Khwarezmia. It was the first thunderclap. And the world would never be the same. He divided his forces with precision. One army moved west toward Bokhara, another swept south, a third looped through the mountains. They moved like smoke, appearing where no army should, striking where no gate was open. Bokhara fell. Samarkand crumbled. The Shah fled from fortress to fortress, never stopping, always chased by whispers of hoofbeats. But this was not just conquest. It was instruction. Genghis had told his men, "Do not kill without reason. Do not take what is not granted. Do not harm envoys, for they carry the sky's will. Those who resisted paid in fire. Those who surrendered were spared. It was law, not cruelty. But when cities burned, they burned completely. Walls were razed. Wells poisoned. Libraries reduced to ash. The streets of Nishapur ran red after a single Mongol commander was killed, revenge ordered by Genghis's daughter. And still, the Khan moved on. The Shah died alone on an island in the Caspian Sea. His body, they say, was never found. But the message was clear. You may strike a Mongol once. You will never strike them again. Back in the east, the steppe murmured with awe. The boy they had abandoned, the man they had underestimated, now stood as a god of war. But even as his empire expanded, Genghis did not forget the old laws. He sent for scholars to record histories. He summoned blacksmiths to forge not just swords, but plows. He ordered that the postal stations stretch farther, so messages could ride across a continent. And always, he watched. Watched his sons. Tested them. Watched the conquered. Ruled them with both terror and fairness. Watched the horizon. Because the first thunderclap had passed. But more were coming. The world had heard his name. But it had not yet learned to fear it. That would change. Part 7, Empire in the Saddle. To rule an empire without cities, without roads, and without walls, you needed something else. Speed. Genghis Khan ruled from the saddle. He rode across rivers, through forests, into deserts. He ruled from tents lit by tallow candles, his decrees carried not by couriers in palaces but by horsemen galloping day and night. The Mongol postal relay, the yam, was the nervous system of an empire in motion. Herders, warriors, and administrators all depended on the yam stations, scattered every 30 miles across the vast steppes and deserts. At each stop, fresh horses, fire, food, and a safe place to sleep. No matter the storm. Genghis didn't just conquer. He organized. He established a census. He instituted universal taxation. He ensured protection for artisans, scholars, and even defeated soldiers who surrendered. Those who submitted were not enslaved. They were absorbed. Persian engineers built siege engines for him. Chinese scribes taught his sons to govern. Khitan architects designed his administrative centers. In every tribe, every city, every man, whether Turkic, Persian, Arab, Chinese, or Russian, was judged by one measure: loyalty. From Hungary to the Yellow River, from the Siberian forests to the sands of Bactria, the Mongol Empire began to stretch, an empire without a capital, but with a center in the will of one man. Yet Genghis was not a shadow emperor. He hunted with his men. Ate from the same pot. Punished his own family if they disobeyed his orders. His law was not gentle, but it was predictable. And in a chaotic world, predictability was power. He established a meritocracy. Commanders rose from shepherds, slaves, even former enemies. He instructed his sons to respect foreign customs and religions. So long as taxes were paid and oaths kept, a man could pray to the eternal blue sky, or to Christ, Allah, or Buddha. Under Genghis Khan, the Pax Mongolica began, not of peace by softness, but peace by dominance. Merchants traveled safely along reopened silk roads. Messages sped from the Black Sea to the Pacific in weeks, not months. Ideas, too, flowed. Papermaking, printing, medicine, mathematics. A brutal order, yes, but an order that allowed the world to breathe between wars. And yet, even in the height of empire, Genghis remained unsettled. He trusted few. He worried for succession. His eldest son, Joki, was brave, but questions about his parentage lingered like smoke. Chagatai was fiery and loyal, but too rigid. Ogedai, kind and diplomatic, seemed best suited to rule, but was he strong? Talyui, his youngest, had the heart of a warrior, but the least experience. So Genghis watched. Tested. Sent each on missions. He demanded obedience, but also vision. He told them, "A leader cannot be happy until his people are happy." And he meant it. Even as he sacked cities, he made sure their engineers lived. Even as he ordered the execution of traitors, he gave clemency to orphans and doctors. Because the empire was not his alone. It would outlive him. But only if the saddle stayed firm. Only if the law held. Only if the fire he lit did not burn itself out. And so, he rode. Through wind, through dusk, through the edge of the world. Not just building an empire, but teaching it how to ride. Part 8, the Khan's last campaign. The fire that had consumed so many empires still burned in the bones of Genghis Khan. Even in his 60s, he was not content to rule from afar. The world remained unfinished. And the Tangut kingdom of western Xia, nestled along the edge of China's deserts and mountains, had defied him one too many times. They had once submitted, paid tribute, offered their daughters in marriage. But when he marched on the Khwarezmian Empire, they refused to send troops. A quiet insult. A betrayal. Genghis did not forget. In 1226, he gathered his warriors again. Not all understood. The empire already stretched farther than any before it. The treasury overflowed. But to Genghis, this was not about gold or land. It was about order. Disobedience, once tolerated, could spread like fire through dry grass. And so, the fire returned to Xia. He led his men through the Helan Mountains, carving a path of terror and precision. Cities that resisted were leveled. Fortresses fell like dominoes. But this campaign was not like the others. The Khan was aging. Some said he coughed blood after long rites. Others whispered of a wound never healed, of omens in the stars. Still, he pressed on. He crossed the Yellow River in winter, using frozen ice as a bridge for his cavalry. His tactics remained brilliant. He divided his forces, drawing the Xia into confusion, striking from unexpected directions. One by one, the cities fell. And yet, Genghis did not celebrate. He spoke less. Watched the stars more. He gave new orders. If he died, his death was to be kept secret until the war ended. Why? Because he knew his presence was power. Even as an old man, he was a symbol. To his enemies, fear. To his soldiers, invincibility. Then, the final siege. The Xia capital was surrounded. Cut off from water. Its walls trembling from Mongol catapults. And somewhere in that smoke-filled plain, Genghis Khan was injured. Some say it was a fall from his horse. Some say he was shot by an arrow. Others claim poison, or even treachery within his camp. We do not know. But what we do know is this. He did not stop. Even as his body failed, he continued to lead. He watched the surrender of the Xia with quiet eyes, then ordered the city razed. He left nothing. Because disobedience could not be allowed to rot the roots of empire. And then, at last, he turned his army toward home. But Genghis Khan would never see Mongolia again. He died that year, 1227. His sons carried out his orders. His death was hidden. His body, carried silently back across rivers and plains. They buried him in secret, in a place unknown to this day. The legend says the funeral procession killed all who saw them pass, then were themselves killed to preserve the location. No monument. No tombstone. Just earth. And wind. But his empire did not die. Because he had built something greater than fear. A system. A law. A vision. And sons who, for a time, would carry his fire. He had come from nothing. He had lost everything. He had been hunted, beaten, betrayed. And he had become a name that thundered across continents. Genghis Khan. The man who rode out of obscurity and bent the world to his will. He did not die in bed. He died as he had lived. On campaign. And the dust of his final ride still lingers in the wind. Part 9, Sons of the Storm. Genghis Khan's death in 1227 did not slow the empire, it tested it. His sons, already seasoned by war and duty, gathered at the next great Kuriltai. The empire was too large, too complex, to rule from a single saddle. But they would try. By Genghis's will, the throne passed to Ogidi, the third son. He was not the strongest or most feared, but he was steady. A builder more than a breaker. His father saw in him not just a conqueror, but a caretaker. And so the empire marched on. Ogidi moved quickly to establish a new capital, Karakorum, a city on the steppe. Not made of gold or marble, but of purpose. It had markets, temples for all religions, foreign quarters for ambassadors. A living symbol of Mongol control without abandoning their nomadic soul. But Genghis had left more than lands behind. He left instructions. Finish what he began. China still stood, fractured but proud. The Jin dynasty, longtime rivals of the Mongols, had not yet been broken. And so, under Ogidi, the storm resumed. The Mongols moved like shadows over riverbanks and across mountain passes. Cities fell. Strongholds collapsed. By 1234, the Jin were no more. But it was only the beginning. The Mongols looked west. They called it the campaign against the kingdoms of the sunset. Led by Genghis's grandson Batu and the brilliant general Subutai, the Mongols surged into Eastern Europe. Poland burned. Hungary reeled. Their tactics were terrifyingly effective: feigned retreats, ambushes, psychological warfare. Entire kingdoms crumbled without understanding how they'd lost. But these sons of the storm were not just warriors. They brought administrators, engineers, maps and census tools. Every new conquest was folded into the great ledger of the empire. And always, the Yam station stretched farther. The world began to pulse to the rhythm of Mongol hoofbeats. From Korea to Kiev, the empire became a machine. Not soulless, but driven. Not aimless, but vast. And the legacy of Genghis lived in each decree. Ogidi introduced paper currency. Built canals. Sponsored scholars. He drank too much, laughed too loud, but he ruled. And in doing so, he proved Genghis had not simply imposed fear. He had created a system where even after death, his vision galloped on. But not all was unity. Jochi's heirs, ruling the Golden Horde, often bristled at the Khan's court. The Chagatai Khanate guarded Central Asia like a kingdom unto itself. The Talyuid line, from which future great Khans would come, whispered ambition behind tent flaps. The empire was growing. But cracks were forming beneath the silk. And even as the sons of the storm rode to glory, the question lingered. Could Genghis's empire survive what he had tamed? Or would it be undone not by enemies, but by family? For now, the horses still ran. The banners still snapped in the wind. But above the clatter of hooves, a quiet tension began to rise. The Khan was gone. But his shadow rode with them still. Part 10, The Legacy of Fire. The Mongol Empire did not vanish when Genghis Khan died. It burned on. Like embers scattered by the wind, his descendants kindled their own blazes across the world. By the mid-13th century, the empire stretched from the Sea of Japan to the gates of Vienna. No civilization had ever held so much land, so many tongues, so much fear and awe. And yet, holding was harder than conquering. The sons and grandsons of Genghis, Ogidi, Monk, Kublai, Hulagu, each left a mark. Some built. Some burned. All carried a fragment of the great Khan's will. Ogidi's death in 1241 triggered a pause in the westward march. The armies that had crushed Poland and Hungary turned back, summoned to choose a new great Khan. Europe, spared by funeral custom, never forgot how close it came to erasure. Then Monk rose, steering the empire toward China. It was Kublai, Genghis's grandson, who finally completed the conquest of the southern Song. He founded the Yuan dynasty in 1271, making Beijing his capital. He tried to blend steppe and silk, saddle and scroll. He welcomed Marco Polo, printed paper money, built canals, and dreamed of uniting all under one sky. But he ruled a different empire, less mobile, more imperial. Elsewhere, Hulagu led Mongol forces into the Middle East. In 1258, Baghdad, heart of the Islamic world, fell. The caliph was killed. The Tigris ran black with ink and red with blood. It was the end of a world. And yet, it birthed another. In Persia, the Ilkhanate blended Mongol rule with Persian administration and Islamic culture. In Russia, the Golden Horde ruled through vassal princes, shaping Muscovite identity. Everywhere the Mongols went, they changed, and were changed. They shattered boundaries. Redrew maps. Linked the East and West in a brutal kind of globalization. Silk moved faster. So did disease. The bubonic plague, some say, rode the same trade routes Genghis had reopened. The fire spread. But it could not burn forever. By the 14th century, the empire began to fracture. Local rulers asserted independence. Communication faltered. The dream of unity faded beneath ambition and distance. Still, the mark remained. In language. In law. In legend. The Mongols had no great cathedrals. No pyramids. No marble palaces. Their empire was built not of stone, but of motion. And yet, their shadow stretches longer than most. Because Genghis Khan was not merely a conqueror. He was a force. He rose from nothing. From betrayal and starvation. From a boy with no tribe to a man who made the world his pasture. He valued loyalty above blood. Discipline above cruelty. Order above chaos. He left no temple. But he changed the world. And his name still rides the wind. Not as a ghost. But as a lesson. That from the bleakest soil, a fire can rise. And that sometimes, one man on horseback can shake the earth. Chapter 3, The Secret Rituals of Mongol Death and Burial. Part 1, Whispers Beneath the Steppe. Death was not feared by the Mongols. It was folded into the rhythm of life, like the hiss of the wind through grass, like the creak of leather saddles. For a people who lived without walls, who moved with the seasons, death was not a disruption. It was a return. But when a Khan died, it was something else entirely. It was not merely the end of a life. It was a cosmic event. The heavens stirred. The eternal blue sky wept. The earth itself seemed to pause. And so the Mongols wrapped their dead in silence. To speak too loudly of a Khan's passing was to tempt disorder. To acknowledge the death of the great meant risking the unraveling of everything they had bound together. So the first law of Mongol death was secrecy. Genghis Khan's own death was hidden for weeks. His body was guarded, his breathless lips still issuing orders through the mouths of others. It wasn't deception, it was protection. The Mongol Empire had been forged by his will. News of his death, if it spread too quickly, could unmake it. And so, when a great leader fell, the process began quietly. The body was shrouded. Not in gold, but in felt and hide. Personal belongings were gathered, sword, bow, flint, cup. Not for display. For the journey. The journey west. For the Mongols believed that the afterlife lay in the west, where the sun died each day. So the dead were buried facing that way, toward the realm beyond the visible world. But no tombstones marked these graves. No monuments. No mausoleums. The Mongols did not build for the dead. They hid them. So the spirits could rest. So enemies could not desecrate. So the earth would not be cluttered with memory. And for the Khans, the secret was absolute. Legends speak of funeral processions that killed all who saw them. Soldiers riding for days, silently, fiercely, guarding a corpse that once ruled the sky. Some say 1,000 horses trampled the burial ground flat, erasing even the shape of the grave. Some say the rivers were diverted to flood over the tomb, hiding it forever. We do not know where Genghis Khan is buried. We likely never will. Because to the Mongols, that was the point. His power did not lie in stone. It lay in memory, in myth, in wind. Even ordinary Mongols did not practice elaborate funerals. Death was swift. Burial was simple. Ashes might be scattered. Bones returned to the steppe. There was no priesthood of the dead, no endless mourning. Grief was private. And short. Because the living still had duties. Herds to watch. Wars to fight. Roads to ride. But between the quiet ceremonies and the unmarked graves, there lingered a strange beauty. Because even in silence, the Mongols remembered. They raised cups of fermented milk. They sang old songs in low voices. They told stories beneath the stars. And they did not speak the names of the dead lightly. Especially not the Khans. To name a dead emperor aloud was to invoke him. To call his shadow from the beyond. So names were held back, spoken only in sacred spaces, in whispers, in the heart. And thus, death in the Mongol world was not an ending. It was a return to the wind. A vanishing that made the one who vanished even greater. In life, the Khan ruled with a voice that made armies kneel. In death, he ruled through silence. A silence deeper than any tomb. A silence that still lingers beneath the grass. Part 2, Guardians of the Grave. If silence was the first shield of Mongol death, secrecy was its sword. From the moment a great Khan drew his final breath, the preparations began not just for burial, but for protection. To guard the place. To guard the story. To guard the myth. The men chosen for this task were not priests. The Mongols had no clergy of death. They were warriors, loyal, silent, precise. Their duty was not only to bury, but to vanish. Sometimes, they were known as the Dark Guard. These men swore oaths never to speak of what they saw, where they went, or whom they buried. They rode under the cover of night, crossing rivers and mountains, staying off all known roads. Some say they rode for months, the body preserved in salt and herbs, its dignity held sacred even as decay crept in. The location of the grave was chosen for its seclusion. A hidden valley. A forested pass. A place where grass could regrow over disturbed soil. A place where even eagles would not circle overhead. Once the site was reached, the rituals began. There were no grand ceremonies. Only low murmurs, rhythmic chants, and the placing of objects, the dead man's bow, his knife, a bit of cooked meat, a skin of arag. Things he might need in the next life. The body was buried facing west. The grave was filled and camouflaged. Grass was replanted. Tracks were wiped away with brush or branches. Trees may have been replanted. Streams rerouted. Every trace erased. Then came the final step. The Dark Guard returned the way they came, but not all of them. Some remained, watching. And some, according to legend, never left. They died at the site, willingly, ensuring the secret would remain. Generations passed, and still the site remained hidden. Even today, with satellites and sensors, the grave of Genghis Khan has never been found. Not by looters. Not by kings. Not by scholars. Because the secret was not only buried in earth. It was buried in the hearts of men. In oaths. In silence. In a code deeper than maps. To protect the soul of the empire. To protect the silence. Part 3, The Wind Carries the Name. In the Mongol world, a name was more than a word. It was power. And in death, that power did not die. Among the steppe people, to speak the name of the dead, especially a Khan, was an act heavy with consequence. Names were not shouted. They were not carved into rock. They were whispered under breath, if at all. The reason lay in belief. The Mongols saw the world as inhabited by unseen forces, spirits, ancestors, and the eternal blue sky that watched all. Words were bridges between realms. To speak a name could summon, disturb, or even offend. And the greater the person, the heavier the name. So the name of Genghis Khan became sacred. Even in chronicles written years later, he is sometimes referred to simply as the Great Khan or the Lord of the Steppe, as if the ink feared to commit his name to the page. Among his people, the name became breathless legend. A murmur passed around fire pits. A presence fell when the wind stirred the yurt flap or a hawk circled overhead. There were ceremonies where his name was invoked, but only in extreme reverence. A libation of arag poured into the dust. A bow lowered to the earth. The sky watched, always. To misuse the name was a kind of blasphemy. And so, even generations later, when his descendants carved out realms from Persia to China, the name of Genghis was not forgotten. It was guarded. It was wielded like a blade. It legitimized emperors and terrified rebels. Whispers told of Khans who claimed dreams sent by their ancestor, visions of the Great Khan riding through stars. Others carried relics, an old stirrup, a piece of flint, said to have belonged to him. But even as his memory grew mythic, the silence remained. No shrines bore his face. No golden statues stood atop mountains. Instead, the land itself bore his memory. The wide steppe, the whistling wind, the scent of horse sweat and sunburned grass, these were his monument. Some say the Mongols believed that to name the dead too often was to pull them back, to weigh them down in the afterlife. So they let him go. But never far. In war cries, they summoned his spirit. In victories, they honored his guidance. And when a child asked who he was, the answer came not in stories, but in feelings. You will know him when the wind stings your cheek in the morning. When your horse moves before you urge it. When your shadow feels larger than your body. Thus, the name of Genghis Khan was not erased. It was woven into the wind. Into the quiet between hoofbeats. Into the breath of the steppe itself. Because for the Mongols, true power did not require a voice. Sometimes, the greatest names are the ones not spoken, but felt. Part 4, Shadows in the Saddle. Among the most secretive of Mongol rites was the journey between death and burial. A ritual that had no fixed prayer or holy book, but one that demanded total discipline. It was not written down. It was lived. When a great Khan died, the chosen men, his most trusted guards, brothers in arms, or lifelong companions, became shadow riders. Their task, transport the body from the place of death to the place of eternal rest, unseen, unheard, untouched by the world. It was said the dead rode with them. Sometimes literally, on a horse, bundled and bound, a quiet figure swaying with the terrain. Other times, in a cart made of bone and wood, drawn by oxen whose hooves had never known the road. Always guarded. Always moving under veil of night. They rode with silence in their throats and thunder in their hearts. No fires were lit. No songs were sung. Each stop was temporary, each breath measured. These riders were chosen not just for loyalty, but for their ability to vanish. They were scouts, hunters, warriors with a deep knowledge of the land. They left no tracks, spoke no names, and rode horses trained not to whinny. And they were prepared to die. Some would not return. For it was said that the best secret is one that dies with its keeper. The path they took twisted through forgotten valleys, hidden canyons, old hunting grounds known only to the most ancient lineages. They circled back, doubled their tracks, slept beneath trees with bark blackened by age. They buried false markers, shallow graves meant to deceive. Sometimes, they left small relics behind. A worn glove. A rusted stirrup. A broken spear tip. Enough to tempt a tail hunter, to draw attention away from the truth. And when they reached the chosen place, where the grass bent low, and no stars seemed to linger above, they stopped. There, the grave was dug by hand. No tools save what the land allowed. Stones were rolled. Soil was lifted. The body lay down, wrapped not in glory but in shadow. And one by one, the riders said nothing. Because the farewell had already begun days earlier, in every hoofbeat, every swallow of dust, every glance backward. The burial was swift. The erasure, thorough. The land was made to forget. And then the riders scattered. Some returned to the living. Some disappeared into the hills. Some, it is said, stayed behind, guardians turned ghosts, their horses tethered to no man, their watch eternal. These riders lived in legend. Not as men of fame, but as whispers of duty. No one asked who they were. No one dared. They were the shadows in the saddle. The last line between a Khan's death and the world he left behind. And even now, when wind moves strangely across the grasslands, some say you can hear hoofbeats from long ago, still riding, still guarding, never forgetting. Because for the Mongols, death was not simply the end. It was the beginning of silence. And that silence had its own warriors. Part 5, The Animals That Watched. The Mongols did not bury alone. Animals were a part of life, and so they were part of death. In the steppe, where the human soul was never far from the animal world, horses, goats, dogs, and eagles carried their own sacred roles in the rituals of passing. None more so than the horse. To the Mongols, a man without a horse was a broken thing. A warrior's horse knew his voice, his moods, his rhythm of battle. They were partners in war, in travel, in memory. And when a great man died, the question was never if a horse would follow, but how many. For Khans, the number could be staggering. Dozens, sometimes hundreds, of horses were sacrificed during funerals, not in cruelty, but in deep respect. They were meant to accompany their master into the next world, to ensure he rode as he had in life, fast, high, and free. The ritual was precise. A few men would lead the chosen animals to the burial site. They would whisper to them, feed them from the Khan's own stores, brush their manes one last time. Then, with blades sharpened only for this act, the horses were felled quickly, cleanly, and buried in a circle around the grave. Their blood marked the ground. Their spirits, the Mongols believed, ran beside the Khan in the lands beyond. Dogs, too, played a role. Though not sacrificed, they were guardians, sniffing out threats during the journey to the burial place, or howling in the direction of unseen dangers. Their senses were sharper than any soldier's. Some stories say a Khan's loyal dog would vanish after his death, walking into the hills to lie beside his master's grave, never returning. Eagles soared overhead. These birds, symbols of sight and judgment, often circled the burial grounds. The Mongols watched them carefully. If an eagle flew low or landed near the grave, it was taken as a sign of approval from the eternal blue sky. And goats, ordinary, humble goats, were used to detect sacred ground. Mongol burial parties would sometimes release goats to wander a region. Where they grazed calmly, it was safe. Where they refused to step, the ground was said to be cursed or already claimed. Each animal had its role. Each gesture was steeped in understanding, not of religion, but of balance. The Mongols did not see death as human only. The earth lived. The wind watched. And animals, as creatures of that shared world, bore witness to every farewell. Even today, in some parts of Mongolia, herders still place a bit of food on the ground when a horse dies. Still leave water in a bowl when a dog passes. Still look to the sky when a bird hovers above. Because the old beliefs have not entirely vanished. And the animals, like the silence, remember. They were there when the Khans were buried. They were there when no one else dared speak. They are still there, watching, listening, waiting. Because in the world of the steppe, death was not just human. It was shared. Part 6, The Circle of the Eternal Blue Sky. Death for the Mongols was never the end. It was simply the turning of the wheel, a return to the sky from which life had come. They believed in Tengri, the eternal blue sky, not as a god in human form, but as an overarching force, an awareness that governed fate, wind, victory, and death alike. Tengri watched the steppes, listened to the wind, guided the hooves of horses and the hearts of Khans. When a great leader died, his soul did not descend, it rose. It returned to Tengri. The rituals of burial were not meant to please a deity but to ensure that the soul's path was clear and the sky received it. This belief wove itself into every part of the funeral. The body faced west, where the sun set and where the world grew quiet. The objects buried with him, bow, knife, drinking horn, were not offerings to gods, but tools for the journey, to help the soul walk into the vast blue. The Khan's soul was thought to hover above the grasslands for a time. It watched over its people, its horses, its sons. It moved like smoke, like thought. It could bring blessings, or warnings. And so the people remained reverent. After the burial, families would hold days of silence. There were no shrines, but there were gestures. A shared bowl of milk. A song without words hummed by the fire. A pause in the evening ride to look westward. The sky was not only home for the dead. It was their mirror. When a storm rolled across the plain, some said it was the anger of a disturbed soul. When wind howled through the yurt at night, it was a voice, reminding, remembering. Children were taught to look up. Not in fear, but in awe. The dead were not far. They were above. Always watching. Always part of the wind. And occasionally, someone would be born who seemed touched by that wind. A child who rode before walking. Who never cried in storms. Who saw visions in the clouds. These children were said to be Khankin, sky-marked, old souls returned to guide once more. In this way, Genghis Khan's legacy endured not just in empire, but in air. He became part of the weather. A figure in the mist. A hush before a cavalry charge. A shape in the clouds seen from the saddle. To the Mongols, this was not mythology. It was memory. A living sky. A breathing past. And every time a rider crested a hill and looked across the grasslands, they felt it, the presence, the power, the whisper. He rides still. Because the sky never dies. It simply waits. Part 7, Burial Without Borders. One of the strangest things about Mongol funerals is what they left out: walls. No mausoleum. No temple. No enclosure to trap the dead or keep the living away. To the Mongols, death was not a thing to be sealed off, it was part of the living world. Their burials reflected that. They did not build tombs to visit. They did not craft stone sarcophagi to be admired. They released the dead into the open air and trusted the land to remember. It was, in a way, the ultimate trust. Because Mongol power was never about what could be possessed. It was about what could be endured. The cold. The wind. The absence of comfort. Their burials embraced this philosophy. They erased, rather than constructed. They let go, rather than held on. This meant the burial grounds of even the most powerful Khans were deliberately hidden, not only from enemies, but from their own descendants. So no cult of the dead could form. No place of pilgrimage could distract from the duty of the living. Contrast this with the Chinese emperors who built vast necropolises, the Egyptians who raised pyramids. The Mongols did the opposite. They chose oblivion, not opulence. Even memory was ephemeral. Stories were passed from mouth to mouth, but without markers. The locations faded. The myths grew. And the steppe, vast, undisturbed, became a kind of ever-shifting graveyard, where the bones of greatness were cradled by grass. Some scholars believe this was strategic. In a time when enemies looted tombs and desecrated the dead, hiding the graves of their leaders preserved dignity. Others believe it was spiritual. That to contain a soul in stone was to limit it. Either way, the effect was the same: absence. Absence as legacy. Absence as permanence. And yet, that absence is filled with presence. Because though you may not find a monument to Genghis Khan on the steppe, you may still feel something when you cross a certain hill. When the wind changes. When a hawk hovers overhead and the horses suddenly grow still. You may not see a grave. But you might feel a kingdom. Because in the world the Mongols built, death had no borders. Only sky. Part 8, When the Earth Remembers. There is a saying among old herders in the steppe: the earth forgets slowly. Centuries have passed since Genghis Khan rode across these lands, and yet the soil still seems to hold his weight. There are hills that local riders avoid, not out of fear, but reverence. Patches of grass where horses grow uneasy. Trees whose roots twist strangely, as if disturbed long ago and still remembering. This is the landscape of memory. A graveyard without gravestones. A nation buried in plain sight. And now, archaeologists and historians come, drawn by legend and satellite maps, seeking the lost tomb. They bring drones and ground-penetrating radar, digging carefully, hoping the past will reveal itself. But the earth resists. Searches have yielded fragments, rusted stirrups, broken arrowheads, bits of bone. Not enough for certainty, too much to ignore. The steppe remains quiet, its secrets held close. Because perhaps the land remembers what the people once knew, that the resting place of a great soul must not be disturbed. Mongolian elders often resist these searches. For them, the idea of unearthing Genghis Khan's grave is not only a violation, it's a danger. It could bring misfortune. It could awaken a power better left dreaming. They speak of the Khan not as a relic, but as a presence. A guardian spirit. To dig where he sleeps is to dig into the bones of the sky. Some say the steppe itself will rise up to stop the search. That the land will shift. That horses will refuse to ride further. That weather will sour without warning. There have been incidents. Machines breaking down. Teams getting lost. Strange winds sweeping through equipment camps. Coincidence, say the scientists. Omen, say the herders. And still, the earth keeps its silence. What's remarkable is how much the mystery has endured. In an age of satellites and digital mapping, the final resting place of the greatest conqueror in human history remains unmarked. Undisturbed. Unknown. It is, perhaps, the greatest monument of all, not made by human hands, but by absence. A void that commands awe. A silence deeper than stone. In this, the Mongols succeeded where many civilizations failed. They protected their dead not with walls, but with myth. With fear. With reverence. And so, when you walk the Mongolian plains, you are walking on memory. You are walking on history too proud to speak aloud. You are walking across a tomb that has no door, no key, no inscription. Only the wind, the grass, and a name that moves like thunder beneath your feet. Because the earth remembers. Even if it will never tell. Part 9, The Silent Inheritance. Even after death, the Khans shaped the lives of those who followed. Not through commands. Not through monuments. But through a kind of silent inheritance, expectations whispered from generation to generation. The Mongols lived with the knowledge that their ancestors watched from the sky. This presence was not metaphorical. It was real. Riders felt it in the wind at their back, in the flicker of firelight, in the stillness before battle. To dishonor the dead was to risk losing their favor. And so the burial customs became customs of life. Reverence for the invisible. Respect for silence. The belief that the greatest power moved quietly. Yurts were still pitched facing the west. Offerings were made not to statues but to the air. Before a journey, riders would raise a cup of fermented milk toward the sky, not as a prayer, but as a greeting. Even the laws bore the echo of death rites. Genghis Khan's yasa, the code of law he created, was preserved not in writing, but in memory. It passed through generations by voice, like the stories of his burial. Unseen, but binding. This is the paradox of the Mongol legacy, it is immense, and yet almost invisible. No giant temples. No vaults filled with gold. And yet their influence shaped kingdoms, routes, cultures. Their discipline and silence outlasted empires. Many nomadic families today still avoid certain hills. They don't know why. Just that their grandfathers told them to. Stories that start with, "My grandmother once saw," are taken seriously. The grave is gone, but the taboo remains. That taboo has weight. It discourages the careless. It honors the past. It reminds the living that there are some things too sacred to touch, even if you can't see them. In a modern world obsessed with proof, the Mongol approach is unsettling. There is no proof. Only belief. And perhaps that is why it lasts. Because when belief is deep enough, it doesn't need evidence. It becomes part of the land, part of the blood. It is practiced in gestures, in instincts. A legacy written not in books, but in how people walk, listen, and remember. Even those who do not know the name Genghis Khan feel his presence if they live on the steppe. In the way stories are told. In the way fires are lit. In the way people look west at sunset. His burial is more than a mystery. It is a message that power need not be loud. That memory can be preserved by silence. That the most enduring monuments are those that cannot be touched. The silent inheritance lives on. Not in the earth alone, but in the people. In the choices they make. In the stories they guard. In the way they remember without speaking. Because some truths do not need to be found. They simply need to be honored. Part 10, To Bury an Empire. The end of a Khan's life was not the end of his empire. But the burial of a Khan was the closest the Mongols came to burying an idea, an identity shaped by conquest, law, and silence. When Genghis Khan died, it was not only a man who passed. It was a force of nature. A presence that had dominated the known world. His death threatened to dissolve the unity of the Mongol tribes, to unspool the delicate fabric he had woven from kinship, fear, and brilliance. But it did not. Why? Because his burial sealed not just a body, but a code. In keeping his grave hidden, the Mongols ensured that his influence could not be desecrated, co-opted, or diluted. No pretender could sit atop his tomb and claim power. No rival could desecrate his remains. He became untouchable, even in death. The empire lived on not through a throne, but through memory. And memory, in the Mongol tradition, was strongest where it was invisible. When his sons and generals continued the expansion, burning cities in Persia, claiming lands in Rus, sieging fortresses in China, they did not evoke his image on banners. They evoked his spirit. The stories. The fear. The legacy of the man who had no grave. This became a powerful weapon. Enemies could not destroy what they could not find. Historians for centuries have puzzled over this. Why would a people so powerful leave so little behind? Why would a man who reshaped continents vanish without a marker? The answer, perhaps, is that Genghis Khan never wanted to be remembered in stone. He wanted to be remembered in the way the wind stings the eyes. In the way a horse's breath clouds in the cold. In the way men lower their voices when speaking of things they do not understand but deeply respect. To bury an empire, you would need to first find its heart. But the heart of the Mongol Empire was never in a palace. It was in the dust beneath a rider's feet. In the oath between brothers. In the fireless nights of the saddle-born. And in a grave no one can find. This is the paradox of the Mongols. They were builders of nothing, and yet creators of everything. And so the death of Genghis Khan is not an ending, but a final lesson. That power is not always loud. That silence can be eternal. That some legacies are meant to be ridden with, not visited. To bury an empire, you would need to silence its stories. But the Mongols made sure their greatest story, the one that cannot be seen, would ride forever in the wind. And so it does. Even now. Chapter 4, What It Was Like to Be a Noble in the Mongol Empire. Part 1, Silk in the Saddle. Not all Mongols lived by boiled mutton and windburn. Beyond the dust and blood of conquest, a quiet class of elite flourished beneath the felt rooftops of golden yurts. These were the nobles of the Khanate, the steppe-born aristocrats who straddled two worlds, the ruthless mobility of nomads and the intoxicating luxuries of empire. To be a noble was to live with contradiction. One might ride all day under the endless blue sky, returning home not to a palace, but to a lavishly appointed girl lined with silk from China and carpets from Samarkand. Inside, a concubine poured fermented mare's milk into a gold-lipped bowl, while Persian scribes copied letters by candlelight. These yurts were movable, but magnificent. Some were so vast they had multiple chambers, rooms separated by embroidered drapery, furnished with low tables and laid with ivory. The smoke hole above, instead of rawhide, was fitted with imported glass. It was not permanence they valued, but transportable grandeur. The nobles of the Mongol world rarely dressed in plain furs. Their robes shimmered with foreign dyes, deep blues from the Levant, vermilion reds from India, and patterns woven by Chinese artisans. Jewelry was common, not only among noble women but among men: rings, earrings, and intricate belt clasps of gold. And falcons. No noble was complete without a hunting falcon perched upon a gloved hand. Falconry was both pastime and status symbol, a display of leisure and mastery. These birds were housed with care, pampered like royal guests. A noble's falcon might eat better than a soldier. Their herds were larger. Their servants more numerous. Their feasts, especially during festivals, were spectacles of excess. Dozens of animals slaughtered, kumis flowing like water, musicians flown in from Persia and Central Asia to perform beneath torchlit skies. But nobility came with duty. A Mongol noble did not inherit idle power. He was expected to command troops, mediate disputes, ride to war at the Khan's call. His word carried the weight of law in his lands, and with that, an unspoken pressure to rule justly, or at least effectively. They were also the Khan's eyes and ears. In such a sprawling empire, information was power. Nobles hosted foreign envoys, read reports from distant outposts, and sent messengers on horseback across deserts and mountains. A noble who kept the Khan informed earned favor. One who did not might lose everything. And always, even in splendor, they remembered the saddle. A Mongol noble might recline on Persian cushions, but he still practiced with the bow. Still mounted his horse every morning. Still knew how to pack and move in minutes. Because at any moment, comfort could end, and the Khan might summon the storm. This was the essence of Mongol nobility: silk in the saddle, gold in the dust. And the knowledge that luxury was not a throne to sit upon, but a reward to carry, always ready to ride again. Because in the Mongol world, the horizon was never still. And neither were those who ruled it. Part 2, Banquets of the Golden Yurt. To dine with a Mongol noble was to step into a theater of power. The feast began at sunset, when the wind softened and the sky turned violet. Silk banners flapped above an open circle of tents, and a bonfire the size of a cartwheel crackled at the center. Servants bustled about, laying dishes on low wooden tables arranged in a crescent. Meat, always meat, mutton, goat, sometimes horse, boiled or grilled, spiced with herbs brought in from distant oases. There were bowls of clotted cream, fermented mare's milk, and, on especially grand nights, imported wines from Crimea or Persia. Each drink carried a story. Each dish a lineage. Kumis was poured ceremoniously, passed from hand to hand, before the toast began. A noble would rise, often the host, his robe glinting with thread of gold. He would raise his bowl to the sky, not in prayer, but in pride. The eternal blue sky above, the Khan afar, and the ancestors beside them all. Then came the performances. Musicians strummed the morn khur, the horsehead fiddle, its two strings echoing like galloping hooves. Singers performed long songs, epic ballads of battles won, oaths sworn, women mourned. Dancers from Uyghur or Khwarezmian lands moved with elegance foreign to the steppe, their presence a token of empire. Every guest at the feast had a place according to rank. This was no free-for-all. The closer one sat to the host, the greater their status. Misstep, and a guest could find themselves subtly demoted in seating, an insult not soon forgotten. Feasts were more than indulgence. They were negotiation. Alliances were forged over cups of milk. Marriages arranged. Disputes settled. Ambassadors studied each host's generosity, gauging both the wealth and wool behind the roasted lamb and lavish silks. A noble might offer a jeweled dagger to a favored guest, or insult a rival with a backhanded toast. A single remark, buried in toasts and riddles, could shift the fate of clans. And always, there was watching. Eyes behind veils. Words passed between servants. Smiles that didn't reach the eyes. The banquet was both pageant and poker game, one where fortunes turned on subtleties. As the night deepened and the firelight danced on painted yurts, the nobility would loosen. Songs became louder. Stories became exaggerated. Boasts flew like arrows. Some fell asleep where they sat. Others wandered off with lovers or secrets. By dawn, only the ashes remained. And yet the feast's true work had just begun. Because every guest who had dined there carried something home, an impression, a rumor, a new allegiance. The banquet of a Mongol noble was never just a meal. It was a battlefield, one of laughter and veiled words, rich foods and richer intentions. A place where silk and shadow met, and where the true power of the steppe was tasted between bites. Part 3, A Khan's Whisper. To be a noble was to balance pleasure with peril. Power with obedience. And no duty mattered more than loyalty to the great Khan. The nobles of the Mongol Empire may have lived in splendor, but they were always under scrutiny. The Khan's favor could elevate a warrior's son to governorship, and just as swiftly, a single misstep could reduce a noble to dust. Every word a noble spoke might echo back to Karakorum. Every alliance they formed might be weighed in the Khan's court. There were no spies in the conventional sense. Everyone, at all times, was watching, listening, remembering. Thus, a noble learned to speak in layers. He would praise a rival in public, while testing that rival's loyalty behind closed drapes. He might write letters of devotion to the Khan, while quietly gathering more warriors than he was assigned. And yet, this subtle rebellion was always tempered by caution. Because the Khan's reach was long. To be summoned to court was both honor and dread. Nobles would travel for weeks to reach the capital, bearing gifts, rare horses, bolts of silk, slaves from distant raids. When they arrived, they dressed in their finest, knelt in the great felt halls, and waited. The Khan might smile. Might speak your name with warmth. Might hand you a jewel or title. Or he might say nothing at all. That silence could last forever. It was in these moments that a noble understood what it meant to live by the Khan's whisper. To exist always beneath a sky that could darken without warning. And so they remained alert. Tactful. Gracious in public, brutal in private. Every cousin might be a rival. Every alliance came with cost. Even the children of nobles were taught this early. Young sons learned to ride and fight, yes, but also to flatter, to read gestures, to survive banquets where a wrong glance could mark them for death. Daughters were matched carefully, their marriages part of broader political webs that spanned mountains and steppes. No noble moved alone. Each gesture echoed generations. And still, they thrived. Because those who mastered this dance, who knew when to bow, when to speak, when to disappear, could rise higher than any stone-walled prince. A noble in favor might govern entire provinces, ride beside the Khan, shape the future of an empire without ever raising a sword. But it always came at a price. The price of silence. Of loyalty forged not in blood, but in fear. Because in the Mongol world, nobility wasn't just wealth. It was listening for the Khan's whisper. And surviving it. Part 4, Webs of Marriage and Blood. In the Mongol aristocracy, marriage was not romance, it was strategy made flesh. A noble family's future could rise or fall on the back of a bride. Daughters were coins of power. Their hands were offered not for love, but for land, loyalty, or access to a powerful clan. A daughter's wedding was often the result of months of whispered negotiation, sometimes years. Nobles traded favors for sons-in-law, weighed alliances with foreign rulers, and used marriage as both olive branch and trap. A well-placed bride could prevent a war. A poorly placed one could start one. Yet women in noble families were not powerless. They were diplomats in veils. A wife might act as advisor, whispering counsel into her husband's ear. A widow might rule in her son's stead, managing lands while he rode to battle. Some Mongol noblewomen even commanded armies. They were chosen young, often as teenagers, and trained to manage yurts the size of feasting halls. They supervised servants, handled logistics for traveling camps, oversaw the distribution of gifts and punishments alike. A clever wife could control her household like a miniature kingdom. But she was also watched. Jealous co-wives, scheming uncles, even the Khan's informants could bring ruin. A single scandal, an affair, a poisoned guest, a whisper of treason, could mean death or exile. Marriages were also tools for uniting conquered peoples. A Mongol noble might take a wife from a Persian noble house, or offer his daughter to a Rus prince. These unions brought cultural fusion: Persian poets at Mongol banquets, Russian craftsmen building in the steppes, Uyghur scholars tutoring noble children. The noble household became a crossroads of empire. Children from these marriages were raised to speak multiple languages, to recite law as easily as lineage. Sons learned diplomacy alongside archery. Daughters learned songs from 3 continents. But inheritance was never simple. A noble might have several sons from different wives, each with competing claims. Factions formed within the family. Brothers turned against brothers, uncles against nephews. Feuds passed down like heirlooms. And always, the specter of the Khan loomed, ready to intervene or exploit these rivalries. In the Mongol aristocracy, your blood could crown you, or doom you. So each marriage was a gamble. A thread in the vast web of empire. Tug it wrong, and the whole silk structure might shift. But weave it right, and a single union could create a legacy lasting generations. This was the work of nobility behind closed yurt flaps, quiet, subtle, and razor-edged. To rule from the saddle was only half the story. To survive in the noble world, you had to master the web. And never get caught in it. Part 5, The Burden of Command. Behind every noble's wealth stood the weight of duty. It was not enough to enjoy the luxuries of the steppe, one had to defend them. Command was not ceremonial. A Mongol noble led from the front. He was expected to raise troops from his lands, train them in the arts of mounted warfare, and answer the Khan's summons without delay. To refuse was treason. To delay was insult. Each noble oversaw a Temüjin, a unit of 10,000 warriors, although numbers could vary. These men were drawn from his own tribes, extended kin, and vassal families. He knew their faces, their fathers, their feuds. Loyalty was forged not by fear, but by shared hardship. A noble's camp was part barracks, part court. By day, he reviewed formations, watched archery contests, inspected weapons. By night, he sat in councils of war, hosting lesser lords, advising or coercing them into unity. Temüjin leaders dealt in discipline. Flogging, fines, exile, punishments were swift. But so too was reward. A rider who performed well might receive a new horse, a bolt of silk, or a place in the noble's personal guard. The battlefield was where nobility proved itself. A noble who cowered or hesitated lost all standing. Mongol warfare prized boldness and cunning. Nobles were taught not just to fight, but to maneuver, feigned retreats, ambushes, fire attacks. To fail in these arts was to fail entirely. Yet war was not constant. In times of peace, nobles administered justice. They mediated disputes over pasture rights, dowries, or broken contracts. Their word was often final, unless the conflict rose to the attention of the Khan. They also collected tribute. Furs, livestock, labor. This was the lifeblood of their wealth, and how they maintained their entourages. But extortion was dangerous. A greedy noble invited rebellion. The best leaders gave generously to their people, ensuring that loyalty ran deeper than fear. And then there were the envoys. A Mongol noble had to be diplomat as well as general. He might host emissaries from Byzantium or Baghdad, weighing every phrase, every gift. A wrong gesture could provoke war. A right one could open trade routes across 3 continents. He had to know maps. Know tongues. Know how to read a merchant's silence, a rival's flattery, a Khan's silence. All while keeping his own household united, his rivals at bay, and his warriors ready. It was a burden few envied. But it was the price of command. Because in the Mongol Empire, nobility was not leisure, it was labor. A labor of steel, sweat, and endless vigilance. And the higher you rose, the harder you had to ride. Part 6, The Privilege of Distance. Among the countless burdens and dangers that came with noble status, there was also a luxury few others in the empire could claim: freedom from immediacy. For the common herder, life was ruled by daily survival. But for a noble, life could be a strategic waiting game. Noble camps, while mobile like any on the steppe, often moved at a gentler pace. Surrounded by guards, herds, scribes, and servants, the noble's world was buffered from hunger, cold, and chaos. The yurt was warmer, the food richer, the noise softer. Even the dust outside their tents felt less hostile. This distance allowed for long thoughts. For politics. For poetry. Some nobles became patrons of scholars and artists, especially as the empire grew and absorbed cultured lands. A Mongol noble might commission a manuscript in Uyghur script, or preserve a Chinese painting brought by caravan. These were not mere decorations, they were markers of influence, signs that a household was learned, civil, and respected. And language, the language. To be noble in a vast empire meant being multilingual. Mongolian, of course, but also Persian, Turkic dialects, sometimes even bits of Latin or Chinese. Fluency was a symbol of status. It was also survival. Trade, espionage, alliance, all turned on words. Some nobles surrounded themselves with polyglot scribes, treating the yurt like a mobile chancery. Here, treaties were drafted, missives sealed, and scrolls from distant lands read aloud by candlelight. The yurt was not just a home, it was a government. And in that solitude, in that space between orders and action, the noble cultivated more than wealth. He cultivated patience. He learned when to speak and when to wait. He studied not just enemies, but friends. Who drank too much at banquets? Who changed wives too often? Who stared too long at maps or horses or coins? Because the higher one climbed, the more one needed distance, from danger, yes, but also from noise. To act with precision, a noble had to step back from the dust and see the shape of the winds. It was this privilege, of thought, of breath, of space, that made Mongol nobles so dangerous. They were not always the fastest. But they saw the farthest. And when they moved like storms, inevitable and cold. Because from the calm of their elevated yurts, they had already watched the battle before it began. And chosen exactly where to strike. Part 7, The Roads of Silk and Power. If war and blood built the Mongol Empire, trade gilded it. Nobles, especially those with lands stretching near cities or caravan routes, wielded immense power over commerce. They oversaw passes through mountains, crossings over rivers, and oases on the edge of desolation. Each of these choke points was a place where wealth paused, and where a noble's word ruled like law. The Silk Road pulsed like an artery beneath their boots. Persian spices, Chinese silks, Indian gems, Rus furs, and Arab glass flowed across the empire, often changing hands under a noble's roof. A single trade agreement could enrich a noble's household for generations, or entangle it in debts, enemies, and scandal. To the merchant, a Mongol noble was both gatekeeper and gambler. Nobles issued travel permits, provided protection, and demanded tribute or tariffs. They enforced deals with their own retinues and judged disputes beneath their banners. In this way, they were not just warlords, but bankers, brokers, and diplomats. Some nobles sponsored entire merchant caravans, supplying guards, livestock, and capital. In return, they expected tribute, usually a share of the goods, but sometimes rare artifacts, medicines, or knowledge. A traveling healer from India might be kept at court for years. A Chinese engineer might be married into the household. Luxury bred curiosity. Some nobles developed collections, scrolls from Baghdad, manuscripts from Constantinople, rare wine from Georgia, carved ivory from Africa. Their yurts became museums of the world, draped in wonders that echoed their reach. But trade brought more than wealth. It brought news. A noble who listened to traders heard of distant famines, border skirmishes, plagues, and new alliances. Before reports reached the Khan, rumors sifted through the tents of merchant hosts. The wisest nobles read patterns in the gossip, preparing before the storm ever arrived. This commerce gave the noble a strange duality. At dawn, he might train hawks or ride with soldiers. By noon, he discussed silver weights and sea currents with a foreign broker. By dusk, he presided over a feast for visiting dignitaries. Power was no longer only measured in horses or swords, but in silk bolts and stamped letters. Still, danger was never far. A caravan lost meant not only lost profit, but reputation. A foreign merchant insulted could spark diplomatic uproar. And if a noble grew too rich, richer than he was loyal, eyes and Karakoram would turn sharply his way. The empire did not fear wealth. It feared independence. So a noble walked a narrow road, even as he ruled the widest ones. But for those who mastered it, those who knew when to invest, when to withhold, when to open their gates and when to shut them, trade became the true engine of power. Because swords won empires. But silk held them together. And the nobles who understood this became more than generals. They became architects of an empire that could ride and rule, raid and trade, all in a single breath. Part 8, Faith Underfelt. Though the Mongol steppe seemed boundless and indifferent, belief was never far from a noble's tent. Among the aristocracy, religion was not just tolerated, it was curated. A noble might pray to the eternal blue sky one morning, host a Buddhist monk the next, and consult a Nestorian priest by evening. This wasn't hypocrisy, it was pragmatism. The Mongol elite learned early that belief, like language or horses, was a tool. Tengrism, the native spiritual current of the steppe, held sway in private. Nobles spoke reverently of the Sky Father and Earth Mother, made offerings to sacred mountains, and performed rites before long journeys or battles. But their world was no longer confined to open plains. As the empire absorbed more lands, nobles encountered faiths as foreign as their silks. Islam, Buddhism, Christianity, Taoism all flowed in through scholars, merchants, brides, and emissaries. And the wisest nobles adapted. Some built shrines near their camps for Buddhist lamas or Muslim mullahs. Others allowed Christian churches to rise beside their yurts. A few, curious or politically savvy, even sponsored multiple religious figures, carefully ensuring that no one doctrine dominated. Religious freedom among nobles was not always about belief, it was about balance. A Buddhist noble might still host Islamic jurists for legal wisdom. A Christian noblewoman might privately maintain Tengrism's rituals to appease her ancestors. Faith became a woven fabric, part conviction, part necessity. This pluralism also served the Khan's will. By promoting tolerance, nobles reinforced imperial unity. A caravan from Damascus, a monk from Tibet, a scholar from Bokhara, all could find welcome under a noble's roof, provided they came with respect and tribute. But belief was not without tension. Rival clerics vied for favor. Competing rites sometimes clashed. And nobles, ever mindful of optics, learned to wield faith as a blade or shield. Supporting a temple might win a city's allegiance. Sponsoring a fast or festival could quiet unrest. On the steppe, religion was as much politics as piety. For their children, nobles chose spiritual tutors carefully. Some favored lamas, believing their calm brought clarity. Others trusted Sufi mystics or Confucian scholars. The goal wasn't just salvation, it was preparation. A noble's heir needed spiritual armor as much as martial. And yet, many nobles harbored quiet doubts. They saw so many gods, so many creeds, and so many contradictions. Some found peace in Tengrism's simplicity. Others turned inward, crafting personal philosophies, blending steppe stoicism with foreign mysticism. Faith, to a Mongol noble, was rarely static. It traveled with him. Changed with him. Shifted with the seasons. And in that adaptability, it mirrored the empire itself, vast, moving, complex. Because while swords secured the empire, and silk enriched it, faith sustained it. In the hush between gallops, in the silence before battle, in the twilight glow within a felt tent, faith whispered. Not always loudly, but always there. Part 9, The Education of Power. A Mongol noble's mind was honed as sharply as his blade. Education in the aristocracy was not the quiet, cloistered pursuit of ink and scrolls, it was an arsenal. From the earliest age, noble children were taught not just to survive, but to command. Boys began riding horses as soon as they could walk. They learned to string bows, gut fish, find shelter, and track enemies by broken grass. These were not just skills for herders, they were the foundation of leadership. A noble could never be soft. But alongside physical trials came mental ones. Tutors, often captured scholars or emissaries from allied lands, were brought to the noble's camp. Lessons were taught beneath the open sky, using sand as a slate, and stories as textbooks. Persian poets, Chinese philosophers, Buddhist sutras, and Mongol epics were woven together in a curriculum of conquest and clarity. A noble youth learned multiple languages. Mongolian, of course, but also Persian for diplomacy, Uyghur for administration, and perhaps Arabic or Chinese for broader governance. Literacy was not widespread among the steppe's commoners, but in noble families, it was expected. Reading meant understanding law. Writing meant issuing orders. A noble son who could not pen a decree was unfit to rule. Daughters were not exempt. While they might not ride in battle, they were trained to manage households, adjudicate disputes, and act as political anchors in times of war. A noblewoman might be taught numeracy to oversee herds, or oratory to influence rival clans. Her strength lay in negotiation, not the bow. But education was not just academic. It was social. Children were brought to feasts, to hunting camps, to trials. They watched their elders flatter, bargain, threaten. They saw power performed, and learned to replicate it. When to bow. When to speak. When to wait. A glance at the wrong moment could bring shame. A misplaced jest could end a marriage alliance. Even games were preparation. Noble children played knucklebone toss and horse races, not for fun, but to build instincts. Speed, timing, calculation, these were survival skills in disguise. Every moment was a lesson. And when they failed, they were punished. Not cruelly, but firmly. A noble family could not afford weakness. Their lands, titles, and lives rested on their children's competence. By adolescence, a noble youth was expected to manage men, settle disputes, and make decisions that could affect entire families. Mistakes were costly. Praise was rare. The goal was not brilliance. It was readiness. Because when the Khan called, or war erupted, or a rival challenged their claim, there would be no time to learn. Only time to act. And so the Mongol noble class produced more than warriors. It produced strategists, negotiators, visionaries. People who could ride for days and still recall poetry. Who could slaughter an enemy and then dine with their emissaries. Who could read the winds and the faces at court. Because for the empire to endure, its nobles had to be more than strong. They had to be wise. And that wisdom began not in the yurt of power, but in the dust of youth, beneath a stern gaze, with a lesson whispered between hooves and ink. Part 10, Twilight Beneath the Eternal Sky. As the sun began to dip low over the vast horizon of the steppe, a Mongol noble in the autumn of his life would often sit outside his yurt in silence. Not because he had nothing to say, but because he had learned what words could not hold. The final chapter of a noble's life was not marked by grand declarations or bloodied swords. It was marked by watching, the herds he once raided now grazing calmly, the sons he trained now riding off in his place, the empire he helped shape drifting forward without his hand. Aging brought clarity. The hunger for conquest dulled, replaced by questions. What had all the bloodshed bought? Had the horses of his youth outrun the ghosts of the fallen? Had the glory he chased truly filled the silence that always came after? Retired nobles still held sway. Their counsel was sought, their words weighed. But their days were slower. The banquets were softer. The storms passed them by. Still, responsibility lingered. A noble elder advised his heirs. Not in long speeches, but in gestures, how to welcome a guest, how to hold a cup at court, how to pause before answering. He taught legacy not through command, but through presence. He told stories, not of triumphs, but of mistakes. Because wisdom came not from winning, but from surviving. Some turned to faith in these years. They walked away from the yurt to speak with the mountains, or invited monks to sit with them in the still hours of dawn. They let go of their titles and found peace in their grandchildren's laughter or in the simple dance of smoke rising from a fire. Others grew restless. They rode still, if only slowly, seeking old battlefields, old friends, old songs. They visited the graves of those who died too young. They recited verses to the wind, unsure if anyone listened. And some were called back. To court, to conflict, to command. The empire was never still, and even in old age, a noble might find himself summoned. A final mission. A last war. A quiet death far from home. But whether they ended in a yurt beneath the stars or on a foreign hilltop, most noble deaths were not marked by tombstones or monuments. They were marked by stories. Tales told by campfires. Whispers passed through generations. Songs that bore their names into memory, not marble. Because to be a Mongol noble was not to be eternal in flesh. It was to shape the wind. To bend time with choices. And when twilight came, the greatest among them did not fear the dark. They looked to the sky they had always known, the eternal blue, and whispered one last thing. I was here.